Hi, my name is Adam Janke, and I'm an associate professor at Iowa State and involved in this research project comparing wetlands restored for wildlife habitat with wetlands created or restored for the purposes of improving water quality in Iowa. And we're trying to understand basically the portfolio of benefits that each of these different types of wetlands provides. And that's what we're going to be doing today, is sampling greenhouse gases with Dr. McMillan.
Hi, I'm Sara McMillan. I'm a professor in the Department of Agricultural and Biosystems Engineering at Iowa State. And we are going to be sampling these wetlands for basically two key services that these wetlands provide. One, water quality, so we'll be measuring some water chemistry, and two, climate impact. So because these wetlands are doing a lot for improving water quality, those same microbes that do that work also can create greenhouse gases, namely nitrous oxide and methane. So we're going to be measuring the amount of those gases dissolved in the water, doing some analysis back at the lab later to be able to kind of understand the net impact of these on water quality as well as potential for climate impacts.
And then this afternoon, you're going to see us doing some sort of like basic wetland ecology work. There we need to understand the fish and vegetation communities that are in the wetland because they actually impact the birds and other wildlife that we're interested in providing habitat for. And so we're going to be sampling fish and vegetation characteristics and then trying to tie all this stuff back together, the water quality, greenhouse gases, fish, veg, and birds, to sort of tell the story of what these wetlands are doing in these agricultural landscapes.
So the wetland that you see behind us is one of the water quality wetlands that we'll be sampling today. As you can see, you can kind of see the open water and a lot of the wetland vegetation. So we'll be sampling water chemistry in the open water, and we'll be taking dissolved gas samples, and I'll kind of demonstrate that as we go. I just really want to understand wetlands make methane. That's what they do. They have a lot of organic matter that's decomposing, and that's natural and normal. And we just kind of want to see how these vary across different wetland types. And by tying that back to these wetland types and the amount of vegetation and the type of vegetation, we can get a better understanding of their impact across the landscape. So we want to get about 10 centimeters of sediment 3 times. So what we're doing is taking samples of the sediment in these wetlands, and what we're going to do is determine the amount of organic material that is in these sediments, kind of a mixture of parent material, soil, sand, etc. And then decomposing plant material increases the organic matter content. This is one of the oldest wetlands, right? One of our oldest crep wetlands. So this is some pretty good organic material in these. Some of the newer ones just take a little more time for that to develop. So we're seeing just by visual, that's some pretty organic rich sediment, which is pretty cool. So got to right there. And you can feel like there is actually some clay in that bottom part of that one. Hold on. So at the top, we get this kind of organic, kind of rich, there's lots of, you can see it's really dark black, there's a lot of roots in there. And then at the bottom, further down, it is much more clay, and you can kind of even see that clay in here. So there's that impermeable layer actually helps hold water in the wetland, so it's not a bad thing by any means. And having that at depth helps keep the water here, not getting it lost to the subsurface. There we go, we're good.
Here's what the wildlife people like. We found some wildlife.
Ooh, that's cool.
Leech.
Gross.
There were 2 different species of leeches on there.
There were not. Wow.
Yeah.
In one little thing?
Yeah.
That's bananas. I love it. Yeah, go a little more than 40. And you'll, when you get back, we'll get it down to 40. So the big benefit of these wetlands is that they remove nitrate. In Iowa's agricultural landscape, there is a good bit of extra nitrogen because we have used it for fertilizing our fields to grow crops, and all of that production is important. And these wetlands placed at the downstream side of these croplands are taking that excess nitrogen and removing it through a process called denitrification. Cool thing about denitrification is there are bacteria that like you and I breathe oxygen, well, they breathe that nitrate and they turn it into an inert gas, nitrogen gas that's 70% of our atmosphere. Those are really good thing. They are very, very good at denitrifying that nitrate and removing it from our waters. So these wetlands are the workhorses of that nitrate water quality story. Really important function that they provide. The challenge to understand that we're trying to look at a little more in depth is if that denitrification process doesn't go all the way to completion, or we can have some byproducts of nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas. And the proportion of that is generally pretty small, but because it is an important greenhouse gas, we want to understand how that proportion varies and what are some of the factors that cause that to vary. And so we're also looking at that production of nitrous oxide too.
So all wetlands perform denitrification like Sara was describing. And so restored wetlands, undrained wetlands, large wetlands, small wetlands, anytime nitrogen or nitrate meets a carbon source and is given time in water, the process of denitrification is going to occur. What's unique about these wetlands that we're studying is that they're designed to receive more nitrate than a typical wetland would. And so these water quality wetlands that we're studying are placed in the bottom of a watershed where drain tile is bringing a lot of nitrate that would otherwise just be destined for the Gulf of Mexico. And these wetlands are allowing for that water to slow down, be introduced to that carbon source, and go through the process of denitrification, cleaning the water before it goes to the Gulf and causes problems with hypoxia and the things you've read about in the news. Restored wetlands, or what I always say is like wetlands where glaciers put them, do that exact same process, but they do it higher in the watershed and thus receive less nitrate, specifically less nitrate from drain tile. And so what we're trying to do is understand sort of the trade-offs as it relates to wildlife and water quality between these two different types of wetlands. We know restored wetlands are really important for birds and ducks and recreation and other benefits that wetlands provide, but we know they're receiving less nitrate. And then now what we're trying to understand is these wetlands that are positioned in a landscape to receive a lot of nitrate, what are the benefits that they're providing for things like ducks and recreation and other things that we're interested in. So that distinction between the amount of nitrogen introduced into a wetland is really important, kind of structures this whole study. Did I say all that right, Dr. McMillan? Okay.
Yes,
I'm the
absolutely.
duck counter. I'm the duck counter, not the biogeochemist. Okay, I've got all my stuff.
I got all mine too, except the temperature, so we'll go ahead and head back. And
cool. Look at all those bubbles, that is insane. If a lab person designed this experiment, we'd have a centrifuge out here or something, like some automated process. Like, no, just sit there and shake them.
Yeah, just sit there and shake them. Just be consistent. Shake them for 5 minutes. It's all good. It's a very well-established protocol.
It like computes with my simple bird counting brain. Just like, oh, shake the gas out.
So what we've done is we've collected a water sample from the wetland, and the process of equilibrating with the atmosphere is now we have all of the dissolved gases that were in that water sample in equilibrium with what's right here in the air. So here's our water that we collected, and this is the air, the ambient air that we essentially created an equilibrium between these two pieces of sample, so air and water. Now what we're going to do is take that air sample and inject it into a vial that we can then go analyze on a gas chromatograph back at the lab, measuring those greenhouse gases that we're interested in. And so we're just trying to get rid of any little bit of extra water that might be kind of trapped up here in the needle. Wipe that out. And
measure the volume.
And then we make sure we know exactly how much volume it is. These gas vials, gas storage vials, have been pre-evacuated. And so we see that vacuum act on that water by pulling that plunger up, and then we force the last bit of extra in there to kind of over pressurize, and then now we have a sample of gas that we really can't see, but we've collected. So what we're doing here is just filtering out all of the particles out of the water so that we can measure the nutrients and other carbon compounds that are dissolved in the water. So we've filtered twice, once to get the really big stuff out, and then that smaller one to kind of get us to the level that we need to for the methods. But essentially we're just getting at the dissolved nitrate and dissolved carbon, nitrate being the nutrient that we're trying to remove, and then the carbon we want to know is kind of that's their food, right? So we're trying to understand how much of that is actually dissolved in the water and accessible for these denitrifiers to use. We're also measuring, which is kind of a cool part of this project, and that's why we have these dark bottles, is we're measuring carbon quality. So all carbon is not created equal. Just like we eat pizza and broccoli and there's different nutritional values to those, our carbon in these wetlands has different quality as well. And so we're gonna keep this in an amber bottle so the light doesn't affect it in any way and change its type. And then we analyze this using some different methods to help us understand that different kind of quality that we might see. Basically just different carbon type.
Okay, now we're at a restored wetland. We got a bit of a hike to this one. It's just a depressional wetland in the middle of what was once a crop field. We're gonna walk out to that and repeat the same sampling for water and gas that we did at the last site. And Evie's joined us now.
Woo! Yay.
Okay, we're taking our break from our long walk out to this restored wetland to show you something that is sort of a reminder of how it is that these wetlands came to be. That is an intake for subsurface drainage tile. It's maintained here on the edge of this property because over here used to be farm fields and used to be drained and is today a restored wetland, and over here is still farmland. And so we kind of exist in this balance of having water for wildlife and water quality and other benefits over here while still maintaining cropland that's in this sort of traditional drained condition over here. And so this is what makes these two wetland types that we're studying in this study really unique. Is this pipe reminds us that this wetland is relatively high in the watershed where the glacier would have put it, where water would have just pooled naturally in a depressional wetland. The other types of wetlands where we came from and that we're studying that are designed to treat water, improve water quality, are receiving water from pipes like these that flow under the ground and concentrating all the nitrate that's taken out of crop fields and put into the surface waters on their way to rivers and ultimately the Gulf of Mexico.
Cooper Prairie? Cooper Prairie. Yeah, it's pretty low. It was already low this year, but
The fact that this is so low.
this is really low.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just divide the plan.
Yeah, so my plan would be for you and I to just kind of start and step like 5 feet, done.
Perfect.
But we'll do the sediment like kind of just on the outside of this bulrush.
Cool.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yep.
We're at a wetland that was restored by Ducks Unlimited through collaboration with the landowner. In this case, it's actually publicly owned. And this is probably a lot more familiar looking wetland to people, especially that hunt or spend time on wetlands in the northern United States. One of the things we know in the waterfowl community is to grow ducks in the north that end up being the ducks that fly south, and for everybody else throughout the flyway, we just need wetlands. Like, just find ways to put wetlands on the landscape. And we've done study after study that's kind of shown, yeah, ducks prefer certain characteristics of wetlands to others, but what really matters is that we put wetlands out there on the landscape for ducks to take advantage of during their breeding season. And so one of the motivators for this project is basically just understanding ways that we could broaden the coalition of people involved in restoring wetlands in the agricultural landscapes of the northern United States, and water quality is one of the really good ways to do it. And so we know a lot about wetlands like this. We've spent a lot of time in wetlands like this. We know that ducks like certain vegetation characteristics and certain water depths and everything like that. What we're trying to do now is sort of leverage our understanding of wetlands like this and contrast it with these unique water quality wetlands as a means to just putting more wetlands out on the landscape. I always get excited about this because most of these restored wetlands that we're working on up here they're all less than 25 acres. Most of them are going into profit loss areas and farm fields, places where we weren't really growing commodities anyway. And we're all of a sudden growing ecosystem goods and services in those places. We're improving water quality, reducing downstream flooding, reducing or mitigating the impacts of greenhouse gas emissions, and then growing ducks that Iowa hunters enjoy, and then of course ducks that fly way south and hunters all up and down the flyway enjoy as well.
When we're standing here, you can't smell this through the camera, but it doesn't smell in a really overpowering way. There's a little bit of that distinct vegetation decomposition, that organic matter that's building up in these wetlands, that plants that decompose, that releases some of that distinct wetland smell. Also, if you step into these wetlands, you'll see little bubbles kind of emerge every step you take. So if you kind of pay attention when you're walking, you can see those bubbles coming out. Those are the microbes in the sediments growing and decomposing that organic material. And some of the processes create that kind of distinct smell, and you might hear it called the rotten egg smell. That's that sulfate being reduced to hydrogen sulfide gas, and that's the stuff that smells like those rotten eggs. Places like this beautiful kind of less of that input of a lot of excess nutrients, smells less like that because we don't have as much production. And this where we were at the previous wetland, where it's down in the bottom of the drainage area a little bit more, we're bringing in a lot of nitrate. It's fueling a lot more of that microbial activity, and we get a little bit more of that rotten egg smell and a little bit more of that decomposition. You'll also notice if you look at the surface of this wetland, we don't see hardly any of that kind of algal biomass, these kind of mats. You see a little bit, like right here, a little bit attached to this submerged plant. That, as that decomposes, can release a lot of that organic matter decomposition smell. We don't have as much of it here. It's mostly floating and submerged aquatic plants. So that wraps up our water quality and climate sampling for the morning. Some of the things that we did today were a little bit more detail, but if there's any questions, please feel free to reach out to us, leave a comment in the notes below. But the big takeaway is that these wetlands are great for water quality improvements. We're really interested in how they function at different positions in the landscape, balancing things like water quality improvement with carbon storage as those plant biomass decomposes in the litter, and potential for release of other greenhouse gases. And then coupling that with all of the wildlife habitat work that we're doing is really kind of a way to think about these wetlands as multifunctional places in the landscape where they can add all kinds of benefits for our society and the surrounding landscape. So excited to pass off the next half.
You just saw us back at our other wetland in Story County, Iowa, doing some water sampling, but now you're joining me and the rest of my crew here, and we're gonna do some fish sampling out at the wetland behind us here. But first, let's do an introduction of the team.
I'm Bellamy. I'm a senior majoring in biology and animal ecology at Iowa State University.
Hi, I'm Ryan Lamont. I just actually recently graduated from Iowa State in May. This is my second season on the project, so I'm real happy to be back out here and helping out.
I'm Connor Mills. I'm from North Carolina, so I go to Lees McRae College. It's a small private school, and I'm a rising senior.
So the fish seem a little different, right? We, wondering why we might be sampling fish as ornithologists here, and why we care, when we think about ducks. But the fish sampling is just one of these many components that are important to understand the functionality of these wetlands, and specifically these two types of wetlands that we're going to look at today. So yeah, understanding things like the water, the gases that are emitted from the wetlands, and the fish that could or not present in these wetlands is really going to impact directly and indirectly the ducks that we are going to see. And we can talk about that a little bit more when we're out there. Okay, so this is actually one of our privately owned crep sites. So we're going to go here. Of course, we have landowner permission to be out here. So that's always important when we're doing our wetland work. But yeah, so we could see this project in particular, the landowner was really excited about us being out here and telling them about the water quality, things that we're going to see, the fish, birds, and really excited about some of the recommendations we'll be able to give them after this season. So, it's nice to be able to get some of this information and give back to the landowners out here, because they're really excited too, just as much as we are.
And so here we have our mini fyke nets. So we set these out yesterday, about 24 hours ago. So basically we just have each of us on either side. We have a weight on the bottom, pretty much just pull it tight so it's stood up like this. Then basically the fish will come in through this center line into this first portion, and then it funnels down a little smaller, and they get into this back portion. So this is typically where we have most of the minnows and whatnot. And these jugs are just here in case any snapping turtles or frogs get in here, just to make sure that they have some air while they're in the trap. Oh yeah, those are some big creek chub right there.
Wow. Woo. There's a big one in there.
Yeah, there's some holes in this.
Oh, there's one getting caught in the funnel.
Yeah. You get him out there.
Oh, almost.
Later.
It's the fun game.
Oh.
There it is, there it is. Nice.
That there.
Okay. All right, everyone out?
That should be everybody. Okay. Yeah,
Looks
those are
good.
big.
Yeah, we like to just try to slowly funnel things down. That way it makes it easier. Make sure we got everyone out of the net. We don't want to leave any fish or invertebrates or anything else in the net. So we just try to make sure we get them all out, and we did. So, all right. Got
I'm ready whenever you are.
All right.
You want to do it, Evie?
Yeah, you can do it. Go ahead. You're the pro.
Yeah, I guess so, huh? So we'll start, grab one of these crawfish out here.
Let's put it in the viewfinder too.
Yeah.
Cool.
And we'll get out. I'll throw them in there. Yeah, these are pretty typical. We see these in most of the wetlands, or a good majority. So there's the one crawfish. Here we got 3 more. Pretty looking crawfish there.
The blue claws are kind of
Yeah. A couple more here. Get them. 2 more crawfish.
You are brave putting your finger in that.
You're kind of trying to grab some
in that
clear water
net.
for these big creek chub here.
That is huge.
Yeah.
Wow.
And this is also
Woo!
lost it there.
That is the blooper reel right there.
Yeah. Holy cow, there's one of those there.
So that's creek chub?
Yeah, so these are creek chub here.
Holy
Oh, that leopard frog is gonna be out
We
there.
got another one there.
Again, there's a little less water in this.
Trying to look at them.
Big.
Monster.
Yeah, so typically when we've seen these fish before, they are, you know, really, really small. So it's wild to see them so big.
And these are also a little more common in the crep wetlands just because they were creeks prior a lot of times before turning into a wetland. Or, yeah. So there's another one. And the last one here, our creek chub. All right.
That's a pretty crawfish.
Yeah, those are cool looking ones. Last 3 crawfish. Can't lose them. And here's a leopard frog.
Bullfrog in the background.
Yep.
Bullfrog in the background, yeah.
And then we have 2 Ashnidae.
Yeah.
So Ashnidae here. So we don't usually count invertebrates in our sampling. Right now we only see a couple. But this Ashnidae is kind of important because this is a dragonfly larvae.
Yep,
I don't know.
a darner.
A darner
Yep.
dragonfly larvae. So this is another species, I think, of a dragonfly larvae. But we count these because when we see these, we know that's it kind of represents like there's like good wetland quality, you know. Usually one of the differences we'll see on our wildlife DU wetlands, we'll see a lot of these Ashnidae or dragonfly larvae in there, but the fact that we're seeing that is it's good here too. So some of the things that we know that are different between these crep wetlands and these DU wildlife wetlands are things kind of like hydrology, you know, how much water is going to be present on the site, and also how long this water is staying on the wetland itself. And I think we talked a little bit about it in our last video, but I'm going to get more in depth here. So basically our crep wetlands, you know, they have some, you know, they basically have lots of water in them. You know, if you think about hydrology and how long water stays here, the water is going to stay for a lot longer of a time. We like to define wetlands in terms of how long water stays on them. So these types of wetlands would be more of our permanent to semi-permanent type of wetlands, which means that the water is going to stay on the wetland for most of the year. Now compare that to our DU sites that we're going to see the next one. The water there can be semi-permanent to, you know, very, you know, ephemeral. And that basically means that throughout a year, the water will be there, but then it'll slowly start lowering, and eventually some of them will actually completely dry out before the end of the summer. And so kind of what this means with fish, to kind of tie it back together, is that these crep wetlands, we know, have lots of water. They're going to hold water for a long period of time. So we anticipate that fish are going to be able to survive here for a lot longer of a time. We also know that the crep wetlands are deeper. The way they're developed is to have this like deeper pool, and that is able, this deeper holding pool, I guess if you want to call it that, is the way that denitrification happens, the way these creps are able to reduce nitrates really, really well. So, you know, they have lots of water for a long period of time, deep sections of water, you know, typically like cooler, so these fish are able to survive out here. These crep wetlands too usually have some sort of inflow and outflow in them. A lot of times, like we talked about just a second ago off camera, but we talked about how these sites can be in the middle of old streams that run through farmland, you know, streams or creeks or something. They kind of build them right in the middle. And that's kind of designed in such a way to receive the most amount of this, you know, what do you call that?
Nitrates and runoff from ag fields.
Yeah, you can keep going on that if you want.
No, yeah, and you can see in this one, we have a dam over here to the right of us, and then the inflow of the creek is way up on the other side of the wetland. So obviously it has a greater amount of time to flow through this wetland, and these like aquatic vegetation and water and whatnot can fix some of those nitrates, so the water comes out hopefully a little bit cleaner on the other side when it exits the wetland.
Yeah, so these wetlands too, like, you know, since it has an inflow and outflow, that means that there is a source essentially that these fish can come from, like maybe a creek or a stream that was further up, you know, they got into the water and now they're going to be coming into the wetland, and then they will continue on maybe to a future stream, creek, river, something like that. Whereas when we think about our DU1s, and you'll see it, you know, I can explain it again over there, but the DU1s, historically, you know, these prairie pothole wetlands in Iowa kind of were more secluded from waterways. They developed, you know, these glaciers went over the landscape and made these depressions, and, you know, weren't really connected to rivers, streams, that sort of thing. So they were very isolated from other water sources. So fish being in them is, you know, typically rare, you know, probably not going to see fish. So that was kind of the expectations, and, you know, what we anticipate to see is that, you know, these crep wetlands, we anticipate to see fish, we anticipate to see a lot of fish. And the DU ones, we kind of had this idea that they wouldn't really have fish because historically those types of wetlands didn't have fish. So, yeah, and had some interesting findings so far. This is how I lost the phone. Yeah, like, lose the phone in the wetland. We're good? Woo. All right, so we're done here at our crep wetland. And we're gonna ride down the road just a little bit and get to our DU wetland. So, see you there. Go on out. We're gonna go head to our DU site and check our fish net. So. All right, so we already pulled our trap that we had set up. I think you all could see it from our drone footage. But yeah, so we pulled everything out and we have it in this bucket. So we're gonna go through and identify what we're seeing. Yeah, and again, we kind of expect some differences of what species what species we're going to find from these nets. So we're going to go through them and talk about it.
Like 2 leopard frogs and an ashton-a-day. A whole bunch of little white beetles too. So leopard frog. 4 leopard frog, a cricket frog, and 1 ashton-a-day. Whole bunch of little snails and other little stuff in there too.
So while they're doing this, something I kind of want to note here is that another thing that we kind of see of a difference is a lot more invertebrates here at our DU wetlands. Other things that we notice are kind of a difference of these snails, like we talked about those ashton-a-day that we saw, lots more ashton-a-day here. And again, those are really great indicators, the snails, the ashton-a-day, of, like, you know, good quality wetlands that we have out here.
And as you can see here, this wetland is only barely up to our like low shin. But earlier in the year when we were out here doing point counts, the water was about the same depth as that crep we were just at. But that kind of is a little better illustration of how these DU wetlands are a lot of times more temporary, and if it's a dry summer later in the year, they kind of dry out like this a lot of times.
4 leopard frogs.
So kind of why this is all important. Why is this big question of comparing these different types of sites, our crep sites and our DU wildlife sites? Why are that important? Well, it is locally important here in our prairie pothole region because, you know, we're looking at how the things that we see, the fish, the water, the drone, you know, looking at birds on the wetland are going to impact these sites in particular, kind of at a more local level. But the big question overall of looking at these different restoration types can be broadened out. So our crep sites, again, like we talked about before in this video and in our previous video, is that they're both, the crep sites and the DU sites are built kind of for these solely kind of different reasons, purposes. You know, our crep sites are built to reduce nitrate, reduce nutrients, and improve our water quality. And then our wildlife wetlands, those are really important because they provide bird habitat for the species that use the prairie pothole regions. We have lots of migratory species that come through here. We have lots of ducks that come here, breed here. And so having this information and knowing how these things really function is really important for both of those reasons. And really being able to kind of understand new things that we didn't know before about their functionality of each type can help us when we design wetlands like this in the future. So when we try to design crep wetlands in the future, maybe we can implement things that we've learned here to also provide habitat for our ducks and our other birds that use this area. And on the other hand, you know, learning things about creps of how well they reduce nitrates and improve water quality, we can apply that to those Ducks Unlimited wildlife wetlands that we have to not only provide for our ducks, but also, you know, help improve the water quality. And so that's kind of the big goal here, is trying to learn some more and learn everything we can about how these wetlands actually function to help us when we make future wetlands, or make wetlands in the future.
Yeah, so I've worked on this project for 2 seasons, I already said, but I really appreciate the goal of this project is really management based. We're comparing these 2 different types of wetlands with 2 different purposes, but we can bring both the water quality aspect into it and the wildlife habitat into it and think of how we can make future restorations a lot better. I really enjoy being able to potentially have an impact on how restoration projects are managed and built up.
So my main thing about this project is I believe it's super cool and super important for what we're doing, and it's good to connect it to the future for conservation and wildlife management as a whole. So, you know, we're out here, we're studying ducks, we're studying swans, geese, and other migratory birds, and, you know, even other birds that aren't waterfowl, such as just secretive marsh birds. So just being able to connect those to the waterfowl and stuff that may, as a hunter, grew up and appreciated hunting. So just being able to connect it to, like, knowing that there's still going to be a future for it for future generations.
What I really appreciate about this project is how focused it is on restoration, because I went to a seminar a couple months ago about wetland restoration, and so the professor speaking kept talking about how we have a tendency to restore wetlands and then just kind of forget about them, and we don't have a whole lot of data about what kind of maintenance we need to maintain these wetlands, and then really the differences between the 2 types, and how a lot of restoration projects actually end up failing because of that. So that's what I really appreciate about this project, is that I'm being given the opportunity to help kind of fill the gap in what we know about restoration, and specifically wetland restoration.